great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is from up the hill, also from the state, and that's Dr. Lydia Punt, who's working at Rhysgyr Hospital. Like me, she was in private for many years, and in 2020, she left private practice to go full-time back to the state. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to talk on the topic of endocrine therapy for the prevention of DCIS. Thank you.
Thank you, David, from my side as well. You will see I've got a lot of things similar in my slides, but it's always interesting because you're talking from a surgeon's perspective, and I'm an oncologist, so just slightly different takes on it. But so some of my slides I will go through quicker then, because you have done that. Right, so that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a bit about chemo prevention, and then active surveillance that you actually already talked about. Being an RO, I thought I'll just slip in something small about role of radiation, and then I'll try to make a summary in the end. Right, so again, as you mentioned, the incidence of in situ lesions are really increasing. So in situ lesions being DCIS, most of the in situ lesions. And they did autopsies on patients over 40, and they saw that there's actually a lot of undetected and asymptomatic DCIS that we don't even know about. But at the same instance, we're not seeing that the mortality has decreased at all. So this is mainly what I'm going to focus on tonight. And we know that most DCIS lesions will probably never progress into IDC. So the big issue of overdiagnosis and overtreatment should be addressed. Right, so in oncology overall, unfortunately, we do concentrate more on treatment than prevention, and that is not necessarily a good thing. And also talking about chemo prevention for these patients makes the patients very hesitant in talking about this. And what we actually then mean is the endocrine therapy, right? So in other tumor pathologies, we have seen much more introduction of this active surveillance programs, like for instance in prostate cancer. That's part of our treatment now, and LCIS as well, because we know that only 1 or 2% of those patients will develop invasion. So in other tumor pathologies is definitely addressed, and we should also visit that before we administer aggressive therapies to patients. So there's another picture again of the DCIS, and that was also what I came about, is only 75% of patients will actually show the calcification. So there will be a substantial part that's not even diagnosed on screening mammographies, and that's living with this, and that we don't even know about. So again, that's what you said, 50,000, exactly the same. But the big thing is it is regarded as early stage 0 breast cancer. So it's often difficult when you sit with the patient and you want to explain this to the patient, to make them understand that this is a pre-invasive, but they hear breast cancer. And currently, unfortunately, it is treated with combination therapies like our invasive cancers. And therefore, we all encounter short and long-term side effects to these treatments without offering a survival advantage. Right, so we know that these patients usually does very good. If we leave them alone, the survival is 98% at 10-year follow-up, and they all have normal life expectancy. But the moment you sit with a patient and discuss that, it does have profound psychosocial stress, anxiety, components that becomes a factor for the patient. And again, patients, because they're anxious and they're stressed, they often would opt for treating a condition that might not need it to be treated. No. So it's our role also to inform them about what is out there. So this is the traditional chemo prevention that we all started off with and that we know now, giving the tamoxifen for 5 years, as David said. And it was given for atypical ductal hyperplasia, LCIS, DCIS, all patients with ER-positive tumors, even ER-unknown patients, has been seen to be treated with this. And of course, only useful if you still have remaining breast tissue. So if you have a bilateral mastectomy, then the chemo prevention becomes not reasonable. So that is the trial. So in the beginning, they did not know if the chemo prevention was going to help. And that's the trial you talked about. So they tested it against placebo. And we really do know that it makes a difference in reduction of ipsilateral breast events as well as contralateral breast cancers after long follow-ups. So if you also see the patients that's taking the tamoxifen, you can see there the rate of invasive and non-invasive is better than the patients in the placebo group. However, coming back to that issue, we are not offering them any survival benefit. And it seemed to also be more effective in the patients that did not opt for the radiation. So it is getting a little bit muddled. And also to remember, to prevent one recurrence, we need to treat 15 patients. So that's again adding morbidity. And therefore, in many European countries, the patients are not treated with chemo prevention anymore. But in the US, about 50% of the ER-positive patients are still treated. And that is because of this lack of consensus that's now out there. Right. So first we did tamoxifen, and we did it for 5 years. And then the question became, should we do an anastrozole or an AI, and is there a difference? So actually the data I know is that the AIs are more superior, especially in the younger postmenopausal patients. But it is really about the side effect profile. So there's significant differences. So that's also helpful to choose or help your patient choose depending on their other comorbidities. So we know that with tamoxifen, we will see the DVT that we all know, or gynecological cancers, but they also get lots of muscle spasms, I find. Whereas with the AIs, we get the arthralgia and myalgia, hypercholesterolemia, strokes, and perhaps fractures, depending on how you're treating the patients with their supportive medications. So then they did the TAMO1 trial that said, can we perhaps give a lower dose to the patients for a shorter duration? And it did actually demonstrate that this is superior to placebo. And the big benefit of that, of course, the patients tolerated it much better. So I must say I've been doing that in practice as well. If the patients are really struggling with their side effects, that you can sit with them and say, let's do a 10 milligram alternating days, because you don't get a 5 milligram tablet. Right. And that is why there was lots of DCIS advocacy communities that started to develop to say, we need real strong data not to treat. So that's a little bit different than the industry-driven trials. So it was difficult, I'm sure, in the beginning to do this in DCIS, because they wanted to determine that active surveillance can really be part of the guidelines in DCIS, like in some of the other tumor pathologies, to address overdiagnosis, overtreatment in this asymptomatic patients. So there again, can we de-escalate the treatment, and can we perhaps not intervene in certain patient groups? So there's the studies that you showed also, David, and it's prospective studies. That is exactly with that aim to say, can we introduce active surveillance, and in who should we introduce it, and where is it safe? Because we're already doing an excellent job with DCIS, so we don't want to, by not treating, make it worse. So that's the fine balance that you need to get to. And this is the patients that they actually did most of the trials on, the low-risk patients. So the COMET, which is the USA-based study, actually used 40, And then some of the other studies, 45 or 46, they only enrolled the low or the intermediate risk, not the high risk, because I'm sure Etienne is also going to tell us more about the risk of the high risk becoming invasive. They only enrolled ER positive, PR positive, and HER2 1+. That is if that was tested, because the guidelines still say it's not needed to test HER2 in a DCIS patient. And the patients should not have had any palpable mass or a mass seen on imaging. If they had wide local or mastectomies, they needed a margin of equal or more than 3 millimeters. I couldn't find that. Yeah, equal or more than 3 millimeters without any invasive component, of course. So I recently listened to a talk of Shelley Wang. She gave the update of the COMET. It's an ongoing study, but they presented at San Antonio now in December. And this is actually what they're doing. So you can see that purple block says guideline concordance. So that means the surgery and the radiotherapy. That's the one group of patients. And the other group of patients actually will not get surgery or radiation. And then in both arms, you had a choice if you wanted to add endocrine therapy or not. So it's called the operative care versus active surveillance. And they've managed to enroll 1,200 patients. And like she said, it was difficult to enroll these patients because some patients are really hesitant to be in this active surveillance because they're used to, now this must be treated, otherwise what will happen? Right. So this was their primary and secondary endpoints, like David explained, but they also looked at how many radiological studies, biopsies, did the patient receive radiotherapy, and what was the chemotherapy rates? That's in invasive patients, right? Okay. So again, in the surveillance arm, and that is what makes it difficult for me, for instance, where I'm working, to try this out in practical terms, because if you're going to do this, you must have surveillance of your patients. So you must be able to get them in mammograms every 6 months or every 12 months. And then if you see a lesion, you must biopsy and you must make sure that there's still not an invasive component. Otherwise, they can continue on the screening arm. So this is what she's doing. So looking forward to that interesting data that is continuing to come out. Like I say, it's not really part of my talks because I was supposed to talk on chemo prevention, but I thought I must just say something about RT because there is also, like we're leaving the surgery and we're leaving the chemo prophylaxis, or we're down de-escalating with the dose, it's happening with radiation component of it as well. Again, that question, to treat or not to treat. So we do know, they did the randomized control trials, we do really know that it does reduce the local recurrence risk of the DCIS and the invasive component in the ipsilateral breast over all subgroups. And there you can see what is the recurrence rate if you just do a mastectomy, wide local excision, and or you combine it with radiotherapy. There's 10-year rates as well. So it really has been established as part of the treatment for DCIS. But the question behind it is, can we perhaps omit or de-escalate it because we're not offering these patients overall survival at all? 50% only will be invasive. So often they will recur with a DCIS again, and salvage therapy after wide local excision is often successful. And that's the rationale between by de-escalating the radiotherapy as well. But I think it's important that we keep checking for ongoing results because there is still a lack of consensus. Right. So the conclusion is we need to reframe our perceptions of the risk of DCIS. We need to avoid over-treatment because it leads to side effects and a great cost to the society. Then there's all kinds of initiatives from advocacy groups like the Precision that I'm sure Etienne will tell you about as well, so that in the end, clinicians and patients can make informed decisions and we can decide which is a safe group to perhaps de-escalate or omit treatment. And then the last sentence is consider your unique patient population when making these treatment decisions. Because for me, working in the state where I see mostly patients with high-grade DCIS, they already come with a palpable lump or there is definite changes on the mammography. We don't have active surveillance. I'm definitely still giving my ER-positive patients tamoxifen, and I'm giving them 20 milligram dose. If they then, but I do try to really invite them to have conversation with me about their side effects, because you want to get them to keep going, so that if they then really have a tough time with that then you can consider to at least give them a lower dose rather than just stopping it. And at least we also have the anastrozole available, so we use that in our postmenopausal patients now for everybody, because we do know we get better results with that. Okay.